To me, I'm worried about the demise of a conservative voice within the Republican Party if we all become rubber stamps.
Hello, and welcome to The Conversation. I'm Dasha Burns, Politico's White House bureau chief, and every week on this show, I invite one of the most compelling and sometimes unexpected power players in Washington and beyond in for a chat to find out how they're navigating and shaping this incredible era of American politics. Earlier this week, President Trump hosted Republican lawmakers at the Rose Garden for a lunch where they focused on unity during the shutdown and on Argentinian beef. That's the policy I'm talking about, not the lunch menu. He invited nearly every Republican senator except for one. That is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, a voice that stood out from the rest for challenging the Trump administration on issues like the national debt, free trade, and the latest strikes on Venezuela. So I caught up with Senator Rand Paul earlier this week, actually just after that White House lunch. He instead was lunching with his colleague in the House, Thomas Massie, who's also been a frequent target of the president. And we chatted a few days before Trump's nominee to lead the Office of Special Counsel, Paul Ingrassia, was set to testify before a committee that Senator Paul chairs. But Ingrassia withdrew his nomination after some reporting from Politico that you all may have seen of leaked text messages that were really inflammatory and controversial. But Paul's perspective on this whole issue and how his fellow colleagues have handled this is exactly the reason why I wanted to talk to Paul. He's an independent voice in the Republican Party, and he's unafraid to say no to President Trump. At the same time, he touts himself as more aligned with the president's fundamental values than some of his closest advisors. So here is my conversation with Senator Rand Paul. Senator Rand Paul, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Glad to be with you.
So there was a party today and you didn't get invited, or at least that's the word on the street. President Trump had Republican senators at the White House for a lunch at the Rose Garden. You were not there. What happened?
Well, I have this position. The president considers it to be bizarre and weird, but I believe that we should have less debt and that we should balance our budget. And I have, I guess, what he considers to be a weird proposal that we should have less debt next year, that we should spend less money next year than we spent last year. And so we're kind of at odds on that. But I take it as a badge of courage, really. I mean, there has to be someone left. What if there's no one left who actually believes in balanced budgets? To me, I'm worried about the demise of a conservative voice within the Republican Party if we all become rubber stamps. So I'm kind of happy sometimes to be the skunk at the party. I'm also happy.
Or the skunk that wasn't invited to the party. Yeah. I mean, would you have liked to be the skunk actually in the room, though, to use your words there, to be there and to have those conversations with your colleagues?
I still am in the room. I can't control invitations to the White House. But, when we released on Twitter that we weren't invited, 500,000 people immediately saw that. So we have a bit of an audience and we are able to communicate. And like I say, look, I support President Trump. If I'm given the choice of President Trump versus Harris or versus Biden, without question, I choose President Trump over and over again. But that doesn't mean I'm going to sit back and just say, oh, I'm leaving all my beliefs on the doorstep. I'm no longer going to be for free trade. I'm no longer going to be for balanced budgets. I'm no longer going to be opposed to killing people without trials, without naming them, without evidence. No, I have to remain who I am. But I also think that it's important for a republic, for a constitutional republic, to have push back to see the legislative branch show ambition. Madison said that we would keep and rein in executive power by pitting the ambition of the legislature versus the ambition of the executive. But what if the Congress has no ambition? I'm in a Congress now where I am literally the only voice on the Republican side for reducing deficits, the only voice for free trade, and the only voice on the Republican side that you really shouldn't just be able to summarily execute people on the high seas.
So what's going on with some of your colleagues? I mean, you've served with some of these folks for a long time. Are they holding back their beliefs? Have their beliefs changed? What are you seeing among your peers there?
I'll give you an example. Many of us have believed that you shouldn't use emergency powers to run a country, that there are spending issues that have to go through Congress, there are tax issues that have to go through Congress. These were written by our founding fathers. We've always adhered to them. Under Biden, I can tell you there were 24 Republicans that were supportive of my efforts on emergencies. that emergencies should expire after 30 days, and that in order for an emergency to be affirmed, Congress would have to vote on it. Well, all of these tariffs are from emergencies on 150 countries. President Trump declared an emergency, and without Congress, he's now levied import taxes on 150 countries. There were many Republicans with me, but they've changed positions because there's a Republican president. They're no longer worried about emergencies that they were worried about when Biden. And likewise, when there was a Biden presidency, most of the Democrats didn't care about emergency powers. And now suddenly they do care about emergency powers now that there's a Republican president. And I think the true test of principle is whether or not you keep your principles no matter which party is in power.
Well, you're not shy, so I'm sure you have said some version of this to some of your colleagues. Like, what's their response to you on that?
I think one of the things about the inner workings of Congress is you rarely can persuade anybody to do something they're not inclined to do. If I were to recite what I just recited to you, which is basically a narrative of hypocrisy, I don't think that makes me any friends necessarily, and I don't think I'm going to persuade anybody. They have to be persuaded on their own. Here's a good example. There are probably 8 farm states. Maybe there are 10 farm states. That means there's 20 senators who have always believed in free trade, and they're all grumbling, and they're all like, China's not buying any of our, soybean this year. The tariff war with China has led to this, and they don't have the guts because it's their president. And frankly, they're afraid. They're afraid that he will do to them what he's trying to do to me. That's too bad, because it'd be a little easier on me if I weren't the only target, if there were other people willing to stand up and oppose bad policy.
When you think back to Trump's first term, there was a lot more public dissent. There was also a lot of private dissent, people going on cable news saying, hey, these people may say they agree with him in public, but behind closed doors, they're really worried. What is that behind closed doors conversation like now? Is there any private dissent, or is it closed ranks across the board?
I would say most of the farm state senators on trade still believe in their heart of hearts that they are for free trade and that they would stand up, but the economy hasn't been damaged enough for them to have a position to do. I think if there is a significant downturn in the economy, I think more will stand up. I think the farm economy hangs on by a thread, and now they're talking about, oh, well, tariffs, yeah, maybe they're not so good for farmers. We'll give some farmers some taxpayer money. I don't know if you can print up enough for the farms, because I think you're going to have farm disasters. I think you've got a farmageddon on our doorstep from this. And there's so much soybean. We grew a ton of soybean.
A farmageddon, what does that look like?
Well, it looks like all your product just sitting in the fields and nobody buying it. It looks like the bank coming for your farm. You remember Willie Nelson and Farm Aid? That's what it looks like. And I think there's a potential that could happen. Now, when it happens, whether it's just fall or in the spring, I don't know. But that could be the beginning of the dominoes that will fall. We're also going to see consumers are being squeezed. There still is inflation. So people say, well, Biden's inflation has come down. Sure, but you still lost 20% of your paycheck under Biden, and now you're losing 2% a year instead of 4% a year, but you're still losing your paycheck. Think how many workers in America have had a 25% reduction in their purchasing power at the grocery store, have not had a 25% increase in their paycheck. That squeeze is happening now. But if you have a collapse in the farm economy, I think you're going to see a precipitous change in the economy. And there is going to be rippling effects in textiles, garments, all of the things that people import are eventually, the price is going to come to the consumer. I don't think it's come yet, but I think it's coming.
You just talked about some of the fear from your colleagues of stoking Trump's wrath. Your fellow Kentuckian, Congressman Thomas Massie, who you actually had lunch with instead of going to the White House, Trump and his political allies are trying to oust him from Congress. They're now supporting a primary challenger to him. Do you think that this is a real threat to Massie's chances at re-election?
I think what Thomas Massie represents is something bigger than him, bigger than me, and bigger than just one congressional seat. What he represents is an independent voice within the Republican Party, a voice that believes in the Constitution and a strict interpretation of the enumerated powers, who believes in balanced budgets, low taxes, and less foreign war. There's a big deal of overlap with President Trump on that. The irony is that both myself and Thomas Massie, in many ways, support the president's agenda significantly more than the people who have gotten close to him. The people who've gotten close to him who want regime change in Venezuela and want to send more advanced weaponry to Ukraine, those are the interventionists from the interventionist wing of the party, have never been the ones really closely alive. These are the people who have always opposed Donald Trump. Unfortunately, they've gotten on the inside now and have more impact. Thomas Massie is going to win. I'm going to help him. I'm going to be with him every step of the way. I campaigned with him a month ago. We had big rallies and great deal of support. So people who think they can waltz into Kentucky with a bunch of New York money and buy a seat, they've got another thing coming.
Well, money is one thing, but the president putting his thumb on the scale is something else entirely. I mean, what he's doing with Massie, do you see that as a potential prelude to coming after you?
I think what it is it's a prelude to anyone. It's a warning sign. Oppose me or any of my policies and I'll come after you. And I don't think that's good for the Republican Party, nor do I think it's good for the country. Look, I think what made America great is capitalism. Well, a big function of what capitalism is trade, international trade. And we have gotten richer. Since World War II, our country and our people, lower class, middle class, and upper class, have all gotten richer because of trade. So it's a fallacy to say that the nation's being hollowed out by trade. We've actually been enriched in a historic proportion over trade. Inflation comes from deficit financing. When the Fed buys the debt, you have new money enters the circulation, the old money becomes devalued. That is what's hurting the working class and the working poor. But I don't think it's trade, but we're going to have a battle and we'll see where the chips lie. But I'm going to do everything I can because I think Thomas Massie's race is bigger than just him.
Do you think a Republican politician can survive if the president doesn't like you?
I think he's pretty popular in his district, and I think he'll do just fine. I think within the state, I don't see a problem really on the horizon for myself as well. People know where I am. I mean, people come to me all the time and say, don't agree with everything you're for, but I know where you're coming from. People don't see me as some sort of weather vane that's flitting around depending on which direction the breeze comes from. I have been a consistent, strong voice for small, limited constitutional government. I've been the loudest voice up here for against presidential execution, summary execution of people that are trial. I spoke for 13 hours on the floor against President Obama, killing American citizens overseas without any kind of due process. I'm doing the same under this. So yes, there will be some who say, just be a team player. But I can tell you every day, people are coming up to me and say, stand by your guns, stand on principle. And so I think, we'll see how the chips lie, but I'm not too worried.
Well, one area where you're doing that is with this government shutdown. You voted against the continuing resolution with the Democrats, but for very different reasons. Look, we are more than 3 weeks into this now. The impacts and the financial hardships for hundreds of thousands of federal workers are intensifying. How does this thing get solved? Like, realistically, at this point, what do you think is the way out here?
I think it's going to be solved within the next week or two. They always come to the table ultimately.
But how?
There are two spending proposals that were put forward in the last 2 weeks. The Republican spending proposal, continuing resolution, would add $2 trillion in debt over the next year. The Democrat proposition or CR would add $3 trillion in debt. And so I offer a third way, which is balancing the budget gradually over a 5-year period through something called the penny plan. So there are other alternatives. The choice isn't open the government or close the government. The choice is, do you want to vote for a spending resolution that will add $2 trillion to the deficit?
But of course, that's not how the politics plays out, right?
That's what we're voting on. And those are the bills that are before us. $2 trillion in debt or $3 trillion in debt. Those are the choices. It isn't open or shut the government. But here's how the government's going to open. The reason the government will open is that every Democrat in the Senate voted for these identical spending levels in December of 2024. So there is a great deal of hypocrisy on the Democrat side because they're not opposed to these spending levels. These are the Biden spending levels from December of 24. They were continued in March, and now they're being continued in September. So the Democrats have moved the goalposts. They want something else. They want, if you make $225,000 a year, that you should get a $1,000 subsidy for your health insurance. They want, if you make $170,000 a year, that you get $3,600 in subsidies for health insurance. I think it's an untenable position, and eventually they will come back and they will negotiate and they will vote yes, open the government, and then they'll get a future negotiation on these Obamacare subsidies. That's the way it will end.
I want to move on to what's likely to be a very hot topic once the government does reopen, the Epstein files. You are among the wing of Republicans pushing for more transparency around this. House investigators recently posted another tranche of Epstein-related materials, including schedules and an interview with the former Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, where he defended the 2008 plea deal. What did you learn from those releases, and what, in your opinion, is still missing here?
I think we need to make sure that people don't believe that just because you're rich, you may be able to get off. And I think that's what the Epstein files is about. It's about transparency, but it's also about the perception that rich people got away with something that a regular person wouldn't get away with. So I will continue to vote for transparency because I think that's the only way we restore trust in our judicial system.
I'm curious about how you see the balance between transparency, but also maybe some of the concerns that people have that releasing a ton of information, some of it potentially unverified, that could further fuel conspiracy theories.
Well, I think you have to be careful about revealing names of people accused of things, and it is difficult. So if you're being accused of having sex with underage women, it's something that could and should ruin your reputation. It's a very damaging thing. So if you're accused of it but never indicted, then the question is, really, was it an accusation that lacked evidence and you weren't indicted, or was it because you were rich? So what we have to figure out from this is, if there's 20 names of people who visited the island, just revealing them may well cast an aspersion that may or may not be true. So you have to be careful about revealing things. But at the same time, if the only reason you weren't indicted is because you're rich, we need to know that also. So I'm not saying it's easy. I am for more transparency, but exactly how it's done does need to be done in a proper fashion.
What's your advice to the White House about how to handle the Epstein case going forward? Because it's been a challenge for the administration.
I would say think back to everything you've done for the last 60 days and do the opposite. They have botched this thing continually. It was a big campaign thing. They love talking about this. Half of the people in the administration, this was their cause. This was their main thing in life that they talked about. It really hasn't been an issue I've been involved with until it was forced to the forefront. But the thing is, for many people, this was their number one issue. And they have a significant electoral body that supports them because of transparency on this issue and thinks there's something to find. So how could you botch it up worse than running a campaign on transparency and then appearing not to be transparent? They got into it. They're going to have to figure out how to way to get out of it. But almost everything they've done has made it worse.
Another area where some of Trump's voters expected one thing and feel like they're maybe getting another is in the realm of foreign policy. America First is a slogan that resonated so much with the MAGA movement. And now, this time around, we're seeing a lot more action from the president when it comes to getting involved in foreign conflicts. What are you hearing from your constituents? And is this the foreign policy that you expected out of the second term?
So if you think there's been blowback over the Epstein files, imagine what happens if this administration gives money or arms to Ukraine. The blowback's going to be something like you've never seen, because a big part of Donald Trump's campaign, a big part of what he's for is America First. It was criticism of regime change in Iraq. It was criticism of regime change in Libya. It was criticism of intervention. This is why when I traveled around Kentucky, people would come up to me and I would ask them, do you want me to try to help you in Eastern Kentucky, or would you rather me send the money to Ukraine?
And it's not just Ukraine. You've got U.S. strikes off the coast of Venezuela, Argentina with the beef purchases.
So I think the deal breaker is going to be Argentina, though, because it's an enormous amount of money. But if there is more money going to Ukraine, and it looks like he is coming down on the side of getting us involved with Ukraine on their side of the war or on any side of this war, I think you're going to see all hell break loose. It'll be much bigger than Epstein, because Epstein, there was a segment of the MAGA movement that was concerned about it, a significant segment. There's an even bigger segment of the MAGA movement that is concerned with intervention overseas. And if all of a sudden President Trump becomes the president of regime change in Venezuela and giving arms and money to Ukraine, I think a lot of people will feel abandoned.
You recently said that there are people in the administration who've long wanted a war with Venezuela. who were you referring to? And do you think the president is getting bad advice right now?
So I can't tell you that. It's top secret, and I would have to, have you expunged if I told you. No, I can't. I mean,
It's a risky job being a journalist.
Yeah, I'm just joking. But no, there have been people, and you can look at the public statements of various people in the administration. Trump has been the least likely to get involved in regime change. But I think there are people around him, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, that are more inclined to believe in regime change. And so I think those people have his ear. And so that concerns me.
Do you think he has the wrong people now?
Maybe we'll find out. But the thing is we're going to find out what happens in the future. But I still agree with a lot of the things Donald Trump has stood for. I support America first. I support the idea that we're $2 trillion in the hole, though, and we shouldn't be sending $20 billion to Argentina. We don't have it. It's borrowed. So that's not America first. That's Argentina first. There is a continual struggle, and the struggle will go on for what it actually means to be America first. But it doesn't mean I'm disloyal to the president. It actually means that I think I have the president's interests more at heart than many of the people around him who are actually trying to institute their own policy and supplant the president's policy with their own. Regime change is not a part of Donald Trump's psyche. He's been opposed to it. So if they get him involved in regime change in Venezuela, that is something that I think is inconsistent with his instincts.
And you're trying to do something about that. You've proposed legislation teaming up with some Democratic senators to make sure that the administration seeks approval for strikes like the ones that they've done off the coast of Venezuela. Talk to me about where that's at and what, in your view, is at stake here.
This is something the founding fathers were pretty consistent with from Hamilton all the way to Jefferson. They believe that war should be declared by Congress and not the president. You can't randomly just blow up the enemy without identifying them and accusing them of crime unless you're at war. The only time you really can kill fairly indiscriminately within certain rules of engagement, but you have the right to sort of kill the enemy as long as they're the enemy and you're involved in war, is in a declared war. But a declared war needs to be approved by Congress. Madison put it this way. He said that the executive branch is most prone to war. Therefore, the Constitution, with studied care, vested that power in the legislature. This is a long tradition, and I continue to advocate that we shouldn't go to war without the approval of Congress.
I want to touch briefly on a nominee that was supposed to be before your committee this week, Paul Ingrassia, Trump's nominee to lead the Office of Special Counsel. Politico obtained a text chain where he makes pretty offensive comments, including describing having a, quote, Nazi streak. Have you reviewed the messages, and should the Senate halt consideration until a full inquiry is completed?
Yeah, I have read the message, and what I say to the president and to his administration, you need to read the messages, and guess what? You need to make a decision on whether you want to send him forward. See, I'm tired of being the only one that has to block everything and do everything. So on this one, I'm saying, look, this is the president's nominee. Call up the president, ask him about his nominee. And so what I've pledged, and I've done for the most part, is brought forward the president's nominees. I'm not saying how I'm going to vote. I'm not going to comment on the different text messages. What I'm going to say to the president, you step forward. This is your nominee. You defend him and either send him to us or don't send him to us.
His initial hearing was in July, but that was postponed after concerns over his qualifications and reporting on his ties to online extremists. Why was it put on the schedule for this week? Were those initial concerns addressed?
Insufficient votes. And so that's the question that will happen now. But see, I hear a lot of flack from Republicans, and they want me to do it. They say, oh, well, you're not afraid of the president. You go tell him his nominee can't make it. So I'm just tired of always being the whipping boy. I'm tired of the only one that has any guts to stand up and tell the president the truth. So on this, he's heard the rumblings, but these Republicans, if they're going to vote no, they need to man up and they need to say, we're going to vote no because of this reason. And they need to tell the president. But so far, what I'm hearing is rumbling and griping and want me to do their job for them. So they need to step up. They need to tell the president if they're going to vote no on it, then it's not worthwhile sending the nominee here. And that may be where we're headed, but I'm waiting to see a little courage.
You're tired of doing the dirty work. Stepping back, there's this, and there's also the texts that were circulating among New York young Republicans. Do you think there is a cultural problem in some segments of the right where this kind of language is tolerated?
It's hard for me to think of this language, which I do condemn, without thinking of the language of the candidate for attorney general who talks about killing his opponent and his opponent's children. So I think to line up something as right or left, look, I've experienced political violence. I was there at the ball field when Scalise was shot. One staffer was shot 5 feet from me. I was attacked and had 6 ribs broken over political violence. I was in Washington, D.C. at 1 a.m. when a mob attacked my wife and I. I've seen it all. All that I've seen has come from the left. So I'm not really a good person to ask, is the right wing the problem? When I've very personally suffered the violence at the hands of left-wingers. The guy that did the shooting shot over 160 rounds at us on the ball field. He was an avowed supporter of Bernie Sanders and left-wing. He was a very angry man. Look, I don't blame Bernie Sanders for this. In fact, I was very quiet about the guy's politics, but I just probably am not the best person to ask about whether there's a lot of right-wing violence.
Well, I think then maybe you are the right person to ask, though. Are you worried that political violence, right or left or wherever, is on the rise?
I'm worried about violence, but I'm not willing to characterize it as coming more from the right than the left.
I think that we're sort of seeing it across the board, and it's the incidents feel like they're closer and closer between.
Yeah, I think it's right, and I think the internet has fostered it. Anonymity makes anger worse and gets really people ginned up who their expertise and their excellence is in anger and emitting anger. Look, I'm walking down the hall with Bernie Sanders today. We worked together on legislation on the Federal Reserve last week to try to say the Fed can't be paying these large New York banks interest on reserves. I worked with Elizabeth Warren on that. I've worked with Wyden on issues of Fourth Amendment privacy. Doesn't mean we agree on everything, but we find areas of agreement, and we rarely have shouting matches with them. For the most part, it's a much more amicable place than people would imagine. So I think what we have to figure out is how to tone down the voices and not give credence to these people who are anonymous on the internet.
Senator Rand Paul, I know you've got a lot going on. We've got to go play the punching bag again. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thank you.
This has been The Conversation with Dasha Burns. We'll be back next week. If you want to catch future episodes of The Conversation, make sure to hit that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.